Enlightenment and transformation. Enlightenment comes from allowing yourself to journey through the dark shadows of death, the primordial abyss of wisdom's waters. For it is the treasures and mysteries that lie wait in the dark that transform us and propel us to a new enlightened state. One should neither aspire to live in the light nor the dark, but should journey between the two in order to evolve the overall reality into a self-actualized creation. Knowledge is your light as wisdom is your darkness. The bold interplay of the two in your life leads you to an enlightened understanding of yourself and the universe you've created. Male is your enlightenment. Female is your transformation. Child is your evolution. Woman, accept the light into your darkness so it may enlighten you. Man, bring your light boldly into the darkness so that it may transform you. Enlightenment and transformation.
Welcome to another segment of Chief Speaks on High Frequency Radio, as well as Enlightenment and Transformation. I am Chief Oya, and I can't forget our YouTube channel, also youtube.com/Enlightenment and Transformation TV. So I want to welcome you all, of course, as I do every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. I want to welcome you to this experience that we call Chief Speaks, and to this moment. All of you first-time listeners, you are more than welcome to tune in for the duration, check out the archives, and also at the end of the month, we do a live open call with our students. So feel free to enjoy and partake in everything that we're doing. But again, just want to bring you all back to the now moment. We're continuing our series this month of March 2016, and we're dealing with the concept of acceptance or accepting, or to accept, whichever variation that that resonates with you the most. But coming off of last month dealing with humility, and prior to that dealing with success, we're now dealing with the concepts of acceptance. And many of you may recall that in our last segment, I kind of touched upon the energy of Oya pretty heavily in terms of relating it to this idea of acceptance, and more so dealing with the scorn that comes from just some of the choices that we make in life, just some of our choices that we make, and being responsible for said choices. And clean that you have to diversify your land, in the sense that, okay, maybe this year I plant on this acre, and then maybe I'm growing corn, and corn takes a lot out of the soil. So next year I'm moving my crops to another one and letting this one refresh. So moving around and kind of diversifying and keeping it fresh keeps the dust off of you. It keeps that very necessary ebb and flow of growth and evolution, because remember, evolution is related to the movement. It's related to the movement, and it's even related to the rise and fall of the sun. We call evening for a reason, and Eve was called Eve for a reason. And God spoke to them in the cool of the evening. It is that hot and cold process that not only creates new life in organisms, but it's the whole of open eyes, closing eyes, processing, opening, looking, not being afraid of the innovation that's ready to do that. That's what creates the new life. All have been imagining and begging for our shrines, that to be some processes, and what you foresee in your own environment. For instance, I was with a student recently, and we were eating mangoes, and I had warned the student they were mangoes from that. I said, okay, well, that was, it wasn't working with the flow, so I'll bring it out at a later date, But there's a term that we associate with Oya, and there's a concept that we associate with Oya when we say that Oya is the woman of the marketplace. Sometimes we even say that Oya is the owner of the marketplace. And with this idea of being the owner or the ruler or the woman of the marketplace. The first thing that you got to understand, if you don't already understand, is that most of the time when you're having references to a market and what we call African folklore, African mythology, what they're actually speaking about is the human world. Okay, so when you talk about the marketplace, you're talking about the human world. When you talk about, let's say, the forest, you're talking about heaven, or the duat, as we say in Kemet, or the underworld. Okay, so we're mainly dealing with West African thought here. So in West African ideology, the marketplace is human life. The forest is spirit life. Now, you find that even when you go to most spaces in West Africa, you go to farming villages or farming regions, there are certain days where there's no farming that happens. For some, a lot of times it'll be Tuesday or it'll be Wednesday. And those are days where they don't farm. Some people will even still farm on Sunday, even though they may go to church and things like that. But the whole idea of this not farming on certain days is actually a spiritual thing, because it said each region has different deities that rule it, and they may not want farming to happen on certain days, or there's certain days that spirits, Orisha, or local spirits, or Abosom, they're more active in certain areas on certain days. So they say, well, when you're out there on the farm by yourself, and the farm is usually in the bush or in the forest, right? So when you're out there, you'll have certain experiences, and they're more active and they're more present, and you got to feed them and this and that. So it's best just not to go out on certain days. But when we're back in the market, or we're in the villages, and usually the markets are at the center of the villages and the towns, this is our domain, so Oya rules that space. Of course, we know when we're dealing with the farming aspect, we have Ogun, or we have even Orisha Oko, or in our voodoo, we would say Azaka. So there are different deities that are working in either space, but Oya deals with the human marketplace, right? Now, I want to get into for a moment why that's the case, and what does this have to do with acceptance, of course, right? Well, as we touched upon in our last segment in Oya, we were dealing with just this whole concept of really the expiration of things, understanding when things have lived out their use, lived out their purpose, right? And that's the intonation of Oya, 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 Oya. So you have Ya and you have Oya, okay? Two totally different words, but I don't think that they're unrelated. Some may tell you, no, Oya just means it's time to go. But there's no wasted words, there's no wasted letters when we're dealing with our systems. So I do feel that there is a relation. Anytime I see words that are spelled identically, I always know that there's a relation, because it's really more about the phonetics, it's about the intonation, it's about the sounds more than it is about the spelling. I mean, and it's not to say that our ancient Egun did not write. That's a urban legend, that everything was an oral tradition and we didn't write anything down. I had someone say that to me recently. He's an elder who doesn't want to be an elder. So he said, well, back in Africa, we didn't have birth certificates. Nobody knew how old each other we were. That's incorrect. That's why you had griots, and the griots knew when each child was born and who did what. And this family is a family of blacksmiths, and this family does salt production, and this family mines gold. This one farms pineapples, whatever, So no, we kept records. We always kept records, But anyway, going back to this concept of Oya and how she's related to the concept of acceptance, what we have is Oya representing change, representing not just change of any sort, but more importantly, the transference of power. Okay, that's what Oya is, a supplanting of power. And it's very important for you to understand what that means even in a cultural context. Because like I always tell you, you can't understand these systems if you ignore the culture. Even if there's aspects of it that you don't like, you have to learn it, just like the language. You can't really say you're in a tradition and you don't speak the language of the tradition. And I know that may not feel good to a lot of people listening who maybe have been in the tradition, at least you think you were, for 15, 20, 30 years. But if you don't speak the, and it doesn't take that long to learn a language. Babies learn the language in 2, 3 years. So you can learn the language of what it is that you're studying. Immerse yourself in it. Now it's even easier because you can go online and get all kind of tutorials, and there's even people who teach online language courses. So it's a new day in that sense, in terms of immersing yourself into the culture of the systems that you're studying. But this concept, again, kind of going back to Oya and the supplanting and the changing of power, and how we see that as related to acceptance, is very key to what we've been covering so far this month of March 2016. And let's start here. The idea of the change of power, right? Obviously, that means if power is changing hands, that there is a change. There's a change, but we talk about the cultural concept, right? Well, when you're dealing with West African sciences, in most nations, you're dealing with matrilineal systems, okay? Not matriarchal. Sometimes we confuse the two. Matrilineal is when, the line is determined and demarcated from the mother, from the woman's side. Matriarchal is when you have women in positions of high authority, okay? But it doesn't even necessarily mean that the men are not running the country or running the nation just because it's matriarchal. It's not as simple as, okay, if it's matriarchal, women are in charge. If it's patriarchal, men are in charge. That's actually completely incorrect, okay? You can have a patriarchal society and have a woman who is the Oba or the chief of that particular village, but the village could be patriarchal, but there's a woman who runs it. So it's not as simplistic as some may think. But when you have patrilineal understandings in terms of your legacy, and you have matrilineal understandings, the line, the royal line, when we're dealing with royalty, it comes down to the woman, as opposed to coming down to the man. So, for instance, if I were to marry and I am a chief, right, and I transition, it is not my sons who will automatically receive the chieftaincy. Okay, it comes down again through the woman, because the only way I'm really in many societies, the only way you even receive entrance into that royal space is through your mother. So it is the daughters who always hold the key to the throne. Okay, and that's a phrase that they say in West Africa sometimes, that the men get nothing. That's a phrase that everybody says all the time, because the best thing you can do as a man, if you can, is try to marry into royalty, because any royalty that you have in terms of the throne or the stool, if you have a stool, it ends when you die. It doesn't just go to your son automatically like a lot of people think. It's not that type of thing. So it's the woman who's actually holding the throne. Makes sense, of course, right? Because when you have children, and we can go back to Osset, or as many of you know as Isis, where did the king sit? When they nursed and they suckled and they learned how to acclimate themselves to society. Who was the one that, their first teachers of culture, their first teachers of etiquette, their first teachers of the sciences, their first teachers of spirituality? It was their mother. So the mother always has that responsibility of maintaining the royal line, because she holds the throne. In fact, the word Osset means throne, or Isis, which is the Greek form, but even Isis has some value to it. Just because you have the Greek words like Horus and Isis and Nephthys, don't just throw them out, because there's also this science in those words too. So anyway, the mother holds the throne. All right, we have that idea. So when we fast forward and we get to Oya, which we also said is Yansen in our last segment. Yansen means what? The mother of nine, right? And these are 9 royal tributaries unto their own. Now we know that there's 4 Beje and then there's one other child, which is Iku. Okay, but the key is those 9 are the 9 rivers, which rivers represent the royalty, the royal line, which she holds and carries. It's the woman who holds and carries the royal line. Okay, so coming back to acceptance. Okay, and we're gonna I think we're going to travel a little bit on this show, this particular segment. Hopefully it'll be okay with you. But so now coming back again to this beautiful concept of Oya and this feminine principle that carries the line, which lets you know men side, actually the men, well, I don't know, let me see. The men are on the right, but if you're watching this, you would see me just dodge to the left, I think. Because remember, masculine energy functions from the right, feminine energy functions from the left. But just aside, men, mate selection, it's so key. I mean, a lot of you know that, and I'm sure if you're 35, let's say 30, 35 plus, you've seen good men taken down by poor mate selection. I mean, completely obliterated. Whatever dreams that they had, whatever they were working on, jobs lost, family lost, whole economies devastated because they chose unwisely. Choosing a good woman, and if you're fortunate enough to a royal woman, it's like, it's beyond hitting the lottery, because you can blow your lottery money, and a woman at that caliber she's a self-regenerative lottery. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Just kind of keep that in mind, because a lot of times through the over-sexualization of our Western society that many of us reside in, we choose our lovers for just some really shallow carnal reasons. And I'm not saying that anything is wrong with carnality. I mean, carnality is something that is supposed to be explored. We're supposed to explore the depths of everything that comes along with being a human. So that's our lust, which is just luster. Lust and luster are the same thing. And what is luster? It's your shininess, it's your brightness. So if you're a spiritual person who has a glow, you may find yourself lusted after often. It's because of the luster, okay? But, and you want the luster. That's the polishing of the lamp. If you guys go back and listen to the show I did on Aladdin and the Genie, I think it was called, something like that. It was some years back. But I spoke about the polishing of the lamp of God, which of course is your pineal, okay? But anyway, so that's just a side, fellas. I want to just kind of throw out there. Picking someone who has a royal gate is very important. And you got to remember, in terms of this community of consciousness and awareness, it's very small. So because it's so small, it's not so hard to find a royal woman. It's not like you're competing with the rest of the world, you see. And royal people, it's in your genes. You're going to be attracted to certain experiences. You're going to be attracted to certain information, just because it's just in you. It's just in you to want more. It's in you to want to be more, so forth and so on. And it's not something someone can just jump up and say, I'm a king, I'm a queen. I mean, people do it, but usually people who make those pronouncements, they don't have it, But you can tell, you can look at certain people and see, like Angela Bassett. It's a great example. You look at her and Lawrence Fishburne, and you can see that these are individuals who, they come from a different kind of line. You can see it when you look at them. It's not just their physiognomy, but it's also the energy and the spirit that they give off. James Earl Jones is another one. I mean, Cicely Tyson. These individuals, you can tell, came from, these are not people who originated in the gutter. I mean, they may have come from the gutter in this lifetime, but you can see through their gait what they're working with, So men, and I know this was a long side, but it's a very important one because, a riotous woman will bring ruin to you, her family, and herself. Okay? And the best thing that we can do is boycott them. Just boycott them. When you're chasing and you're imbalanced in your carnality, a lot of times you'll give things to a riotous woman that she should never have. And this part of the side really goes for the men and the women. And I've been saying that for years. Women, no hammers, no hugs. And I mean, that's something I just been saying. Like, if he's not building, get off of him. Don't let him touch you. Don't touch him. If they're not building towards something, what are they here for? What's the point? Why are you here? And the same thing with the women. I mean, if you have these women who, fellas, you kind of know the type that I'm speaking about. It's just who's just loud and lacks decorum, lacks respect, lacks honor, lacks devotion, lacks stamina, so forth, so on. And there has to be a better men's code, in that sense, and just like there needs to be a better sisterhood code, where when certain individuals identified as being dangerous to the community, they shouldn't be allowed to mate anymore. They shouldn't be allowed to court anymore. They should be cut off from that. So that's a side. That's a long side. But actually, I'm going to be getting into that one of the months. I can't remember the topic for that month, but I'll be getting into that later anyway. Just some of the codes that we got to start taking on in order to ensure our survival, our existence. Forget our survival. We'll survive, but our existence. But so in any case, we were talking about this whole matrilineal aspect of holding the throne and the changing of power and the changing hands. Well, there's something that's very important about that when you're dealing with the changing of power, and more importantly, the accepting of power, taking that mantle. See, that's where Shango comes in. Because Shango, I want it. Give it to me. Give it to me. He's always ready to take power or to receive power, because it's Oya who's doing the handoff anyway. So he's always ready to receive that power, and he's not afraid of it. He's not afraid to do what's necessary with it. But now let's take a look at this idea of acceptance as it interplays within this theme. When you even approach it from a business perspective, we have, or even from a financial perspective, we have the concept of acceptance for value, or even contractual acceptance or acceptance upon contract, which is a term that we use in business a lot, which requires a legitimate or formal contract in order to pursue an action further, than where you currently are with it, right? But there's an implicit idea that lies within the concept of a contract, and that's if there's an offer that's made, and there's either a denial. There's three things: a denial, an acceptance of that initial offer, or a counter offer, right? And the minute that there's a counter offer, there's an implied acceptance of the actual contract. Now we're just negotiating the terms. So I'll give you an example. If you're driving your car and you're pulled over by a policing agent, and they say, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" And you say, "No, I don't know why, officer." Or if they say, "You were speeding," and you say, "I wasn't speeding," they're offering you this idea of their authority in your life, and someone who has the authority to police you on your driving, performance. And when you say, "I wasn't speeding," you're now negotiating that contract. And once you negotiate that offer, you now have accepted the contract. Now so then what they say is, okay, well, I'm going to give you the ticket, and we can argue this in front of a judge, because now we have a contract. The fight's on. This is like Don King's promotions, I'll see you in court May 13th. That's the big showdown. And the judge will be the referee. but we happen to work for the same people, so it's the same thing. If you can kind of wrap your head around that, it's the same way that the world works. Now, again, we're talking about the human world, human existence, and we're relating that to the marketplace, or it's, for us, it's already been related to the marketplace when we're dealing with the West African concept, right? So we have this idea of the marketplace, and we have this idea of within the marketplace, especially if any of you have ever walked through a busy marketplace, you know that there's constantly offers being put out. Just when you're walking, pss, 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 you may hear that. Or if you're in Nigeria, you hear, right? And if any of you first time visitors in Nigeria, take no offense to that. That's how people are called. They're not trying to, be fresh with you. So here in the States, you may go, psst. Over there they go. So, with that idea, there's constantly offers being put forth, right? So whether someone's trying to sell papaya, or they're trying to sell worm pills, deworming pills, or they're trying to sell coconuts, or they're trying to sell phone cards, a cell phone, whatever. But there's constantly being offers being put out. And your response determines if the contract is going to lock in. Whether you say, oh, well, what's the price? That's too high. That's too low. That's this, that's that. We now have a contract. Okay? So life works in the same way. There's constantly offers being put forth by the universe to determine, based on your level of evolution, what it is that you're going to accept. And your acceptance determines how the universe is going to deal with you. So the same thing when you're traveling, another chief fun fact, you have the term haggle, right? Haggle is actually an African word. For those of you don't know, haggle. If you ever heard that term before, which is usually someone gives you a price for something, or you see a price displayed, you say, "Come on, you could do better. Cut me some slack," or "What's your last price on that? What's your best price on that?" And you go back and forth. Give me 30. I'll give you 20. Give me 28. Nah, I'll give you 26. You just kind of go back and forth until you come to an agreed upon price. Well, in indigenous culture, that's actually how you make friends. And that's how you can always tell a foreigner from a local, is their persistence in their haggling. A foreigner usually is looking at exchange rates and saying, well, wow, I came here with £1, but over here a pound is 8 of theirs, so yeah, sure, I'll pay that. And then the people kind of look at you almost with disgust when you do that. You just don't realize it. Whereas when you come in and you're like, no, boom, everything, you're haggling, and you might be arguing and going back and forth and yelling with the person. And then when you're done, that's your new brother, or you exchange your phone numbers. Yeah, next time you come to give me a call, because now you're expected, because you created that contract and that bond, that bond with that particular vendor or whatever it is that it could be a taxi driver. You're expecting now when you come back, this is the booth you go to. Because I established a contractual relationship with you just through counter-offering. And through you letting me know what it is that you're going to accept from what you're not going to accept, and vice versa. Well, the same thing works with our bounding and our healthy experiences with the universe. Counter-offers are necessary. I know a lot of times when we think about spiritual acceptance, it usually takes us into the realm of accepting anything. And our ability to accept any and everything determines our power, because we can go with the flow of what the universe is doing, because we still have this very churchical idea that God knows what's best. So we'll just say, well, the spirits know, or the ancestors will lead me in the right direction. How do you know that? If you can envision what it is that you, just like people go to court and say that, well, we'll let the judge decide. You have that much faith in this system, this broken system? You have that much faith in a flawed spiritual kingdom? Because remember, we are the byproduct of the spiritual world. We are the, I'll just leave it a byproduct. But we're the after effect of the spiritual world. So based on that, your flaws represent the flaws in the spiritual kingdom. As above, so below, the laws of correspondence, right? So to have this like real churchical idea of, well, the spirits know what's best, I'm going to leave it to the spirits, is suicidal. So if something is offered to you, you have the right to counteroffer. You know, you may be affirming for a new job, right? And you're doing your spiritual work, and you get an offer for a job that's maybe paying $30,000 less than what you actually want to make. Now, good sign, because you're getting a response. There's a bidding war happening now. Somebody's saying, "Well, here, I got something for you," and you can counter and say, "Nah, bring it up." And here's some more rum. Here's some more flowers. Bring it up. And you go back and forth. And when you create that haggling, when you create that counteroffer experience, you're now creating a bond, and you're letting the universe know what you will accept as value, what is valuable in your life. You see, so sometimes our all-inclusive mindset creates an inclusiveness when it comes to acceptance, which is not necessarily necessary. It's not really necessary. Sometimes we think, I guess, we have to do that to show true appreciation, but it's not necessary. The reality of it is there are intelligences within the universe, and there are spirit beings and archetypes and all of these different things that we work with, but it is the exchange of our human knowledge, the marketplace knowledge, with the knowledge of the forest, the bush wisdom with the technology of the city, and it is the exchange of those two things that give rise to evolution, to evolved creation. You see, you got to have both of them. I mean, there's a series, Black Panther. I think they're in Wakanda, something like that. Wakanda. But check it out. Cool little Marvel. I think Reggie Hudlin did it. But Black Panther, and they're in the middle of the bush in Africa in a fictitious nation called Wakanda, but they have like the top technology in the world. It's that combination of nature and advanced human psychology and technology. So that is the relationship even with Oya and Ogun. Ogun deals with technology, but he's also a farmer. And Oya is dealing with the human marketplace where the demand is, and Ogun supplies the demand. You see, and then Shango takes it and says, "Okay, now let's do something with it. Let's run stuff. Let's tear some stuff up with it." So again, it's just this whole concept of what we accept. It really comes from that marketplace spiritual ideology of the whole world is a marketplace where people are offering you things, or spirits are offering you things, and you have the right to counteroffer. You have the right to say, Eshu, I would like to go beyond these opportunities that you're presenting to me. I want a little bit more than that. I want to go higher, or I want to go lower. I want to go to the left. I want to, go to the right. Let's get some latitude and longitude, in the midst here. You have the right to do that because this is a marketplace. And just like in our spiritual culture or our human culture, social culture in West Africa, when you don't haggle, when you don't counter offer, the people look at you like, oh, you know, we have this idea of haggling in the human marketplace, which creates a certain relationship or counter offering or acceptance of a contract or not acceptance of a contract, non-acceptance. The same thing applies to the spiritual world. Everything that the spirits give to you or hand to you doesn't necessarily have to be taken. Again, this idea of this overarching and all-knowing and all-seeing deity that's always constantly looking out for your best interest is good when you're a child. But when you mature in your spirituality and you mature in your thought, sometimes you have to close the eye, go to that 0 point and kind of reflect and think about, okay, well, where do I need to be going based on what my life purpose is, which is, again, why we get our Itefa readings. Where is this thing going? What am I supposed to be doing? And that creates a lot of power, that creates a lot of advantage for you in terms of knowing what moves to make, knowing what contracts to accept, with knowing what contracts not to accept. Because in the human market, there's all kind of offers. Everything's being thrown at you as soon as you come into the world in terms of what you should emulate. No, this is how you write your lines. They even give you those books as a child, with the dotted lines, and this is how you trace your letters with it. No, make your Y like this, make your O like this, your comma should go like that. Those are all offers, and those are offers of emulation. And one of the first offers that we get as children is, will I evolve and will I receive my power through emulation or evolution? And for the most of us, it's emulation. You got to learn how to speak. Why? So that you can communicate with the rest of the world. You have to learn how to write a certain way. Why? So you can communicate with the rest of the world. And that's how you will get somewhere in life. So that's an offer that we usually contractually, we take it involuntarily. Because why? Our parents put us in daycare and kindergarten and all the other first through whatever, and that's an involuntary contract that we sign, but nonetheless we sign it. So it's the same thing when you're dealing with your spiritual walk. Sometimes you want to look at what you're doing in the sense of emulation, or in the form of emulation that comes from possibly something else that someone has just shown you. Why do we like this colored candle? Why do we use rum? Why do we use wine? Why do we use this? Are you getting that stuff because you're just emulating and there's no instruction that's following it? Of course, I've said before, when in doubt, copy your teacher, but copy your teacher. There should be a teacher. There should be someone you can say, okay, I'm doing this. May I ask now, am I ready to ask, why are we using these specific ingredients? Why do we say these words like this? Why do we drum first? Why do we sing first? Those are questions that you should be able to ask at some point. Most of you can't ask those in the beginning. You don't realize it and you get frustrated. Some people come in with a lot of questions that they wouldn't even understand the answers to. They have to go through the emulated steps first. But again, you can reject the contract. You can say, no, I'm not doing that. I don't want to do that. Instead of starting with lighting candles, I'm going to learn what fire is. I'm going to learn how to make a candle. I'm going to learn what wax is. I'm going to learn what a wick is, things like that. And then I'll take your class. It's up to you. That's the whole concept and idea of it. So with Oya, one of the reasons why she gets beat up so much, and she's the wind inside of water. She's the wave. And she's also the wind within air. She becomes the current. One of the reasons she gets beat up so much is because, being the owner of the marketplace, she's constantly receiving offers, rejecting offers, taking offers, counter offering. So when you go out there and you're venturing out into life like that, and you're not just accepting what is being thrown at your feet, then you also make yourself a bit more vulnerable and susceptible to attack. So like, even the spiritual people sometimes that in the world, I've seen people lose followers or lose supporters or lose students because they went through a trial, and not understanding that the larger your purpose, the larger the trial is going to be. So yeah, you may see your teacher go through a literal trial. Something may happen. They may lose their house. They may lose their spouse. Their children may die. They may, have a stroke or something like that, because they are venturing into worlds that you could never imagine. They are allowing offers to filter through them and through their system that you couldn't even withstand. You don't have the nervous system to even take it. So of course, the greater the risk, the greater the peril that you put yourself into. But that's a part of the sacrificial nature of a teacher as well. So the acceptance comes in so many different forms. But, I really just wanted to speak on the Oya aspect of, being that ruler of the marketplace and identifying the world and life as said marketplace. So the ruler of the marketplace is the one that holds the power of transference, of the supplanting of power. And us being here in the world is about just shifting our focus and our attention to different things. Well, when you shift your focus and attention to different things, you empower different things. It's like if you looked around the room and everything you put your eyes on all of a sudden lit up. In a way it does, because that contractual agreement is what makes things real. So just like when that policing agent comes and pulls you over and says, you know why I pulled you over? And you identify with the roles that they're playing and you give them your attention. You look at them and give them your attention and identify with the role. You just now made them whatever they say they are. My name is Officer Lebrowski. Now they become that. Because you say, hey, oh, Officer Lebrowski, I don't know. You're giving them your attention in that sense. As opposed to you getting pulled over and they say, you know why I pulled you over? And you just look forward and don't say anything. Sir? License and registration. You may do nothing. Or you may just look forward and say, I'm pulling my car over right now because I'm scared. Someone has flashing lights behind me and I think they have a gun. So I don't want to be harmed. I don't want to be brutally seized. I don't want to be kidnapped. I don't want to have any of those things happen to me, which are actually illegal. So I'm going to pull over because I'm scared. That's it. You see, you're taking power away from what the contract that was presented, and now you're presenting a new contract. You see, you're presenting a new contract. I'm pulling over because I'm scared. Now, let's see if they'll accept that one. If the person says something like, you don't have anything to be afraid of from me, contract accepted. You see, because there's a counter offer now. And spirituality works the same way. And we're going to get into that. I know it may be a little complex for some of you, but don't worry about it. I always start from here and then I break down till he's like, okay, can you go to a new one now? So don't worry, we're going to cover it a little bit more. But I wanted to introduce the idea of the marketplace and its relationship to the acceptance of value and the acceptance of the contractual reality and how we get wrapped into the contractual reality through our implicit acceptance. And sometimes our acceptance is explicit. We clearly say, yeah, I'm signing this contract, I'm doing this, I'm getting married, here's my marriage license, here's my gun license, here's my driver's license. Sometimes it is explicit, but a lot of times we're signing ourselves into a reality that is not what we want it to begin with, and it doesn't even speak to our greater and higher purpose. Okay, so I want to thank you all for listening. This has been my portion of Chief Speaks for this beautiful Sunday dawning. And again, as always, I will that you all have gotten something out of this, and you're growing. We have a webinar this evening. It's 7 p.m. Eastern, I believe. 7 p.m. Eastern, the astral projection webinar, and which is going to be a great one. I was really thinking about it a lot. I was at a funeral pretty much all day yesterday, and just kind of stayed up and really thought about some of the questions that people ask a lot of times as it pertains to people transitioning. What do we do? What can I do? Where are they going? This, that. And it made me think about this astral projection webinar tonight. I said, this would be good. We try to sculpt the shows and the webinars and everything based off of what I determine people need to know. Or not need to know, let me say, what they need to know based on what they ask. So sometimes I take the most common questions, and over the years, the stumbling blocks, the things that I've always noticed people have gotten caught up on, and I'll say, okay, I'm going to do a show on that. So I'll do a show on success. What is real success? I'll do a show on, humility, because, that's an issue. Or like what we're doing right now, acceptance. What are you accepting in life? And a lot of times the misconception that acceptance should be just acquiescence. And certainly when you break down the etymology of acceptance, its root comes from acquiescence. But even acquiescence deals with the essence of an actual offer. What is really being offered here? It's not just passive meekness. Okay, yeah, fine, whatever you want to do to me, just do it. It's not defeat. Acceptance doesn't equate to defeat. Usually, even when you're going through contract negotiations, you negotiate, you get the terms that you want, and then you accept. You see? So acceptance can be an active thing. It doesn't have to be so passive. All right. But anyway, thank you all for listening. This is Chief Yuya. I encourage you to sign up for the webinar this evening. It should not be too late to get your spot in the astral projection webinar. Also, any of you who are interested in readings, still getting those emails. And don't worry, I think I'm gonna have us build a site just for the readings, because people are still asking, how do I get a reading? Also, a lot of you have been sending emails like, I need help with my personal development, my personal growth. Please help me. And that's been like just the message, nothing else. Sign up for the class, our new spiritual training, phase 1. Go to saduluhouse.com. SADULUHOUSE.com. That's what I created for you. So a lot of you are emailing me kind of maybe thinking that we're going to now do this pen pal thing. And I can't, at this point in my life, I just don't have the actual energy, time, and honestly the desire to work with as many people like that, like on a whim, just through email. It would be overwhelming. I mean, I get a lot of email every day. So that's why I try to do so many shows on so many different topics, so I can always point someone here. You having trouble here? Check this show. Check the archives there. Check the archives there. And then anything after that, you can get a consultation. You can sign up for Osiris Life if you want to have consistent, work with me, and you want to work with me monthly and have me guide you through something. OsirisLife.com. The school, SaduluHouse.com. And on all those sites, you can get the links for the readings. Sadulu House, Our New Nation. Usually even within these shows, in the descriptions, it shows you where to click on for a reading. So just so you understand, it's not me just kind of snubbing everybody off like, I ain't got time for you. It's not that type of thing. But you could only imagine. I know sometimes when you maybe get to the point when you put your email in, you might feel like maybe you're isolated, you're not doing that much, and maybe I'm in a similar space, but I can assure you my schedule is jam-packed, and I would have it no other way for right now while I got the energy. Until I start slowing up, then you won't even see me anymore. But up until that time, there's so much going on with Anu, and there's a lot of travel that I engage in, and so much in lectures and workshops and rites of passage, readings, spiritual work that I do for people. I also have, we have the Africa Initiative, the technology centers, the schools that I support. So, there's a lot going on with Anu. And that's why I try to give you so much, so that way you're covered. You're covered while I'm gone, And so just kind of think about that, And again, I'm not snubbing you. The emails sometimes, I read all of them, but sometimes I can respond. Sometimes I can't. Sometimes it's like, oh, this person just needs to take the class, or this person just needs to listen to go search the archives. Sometimes the answers are right there waiting for you. All right. So to my high frequency brethren, to my Enlightenment transformation family, even the iTunes folks who just get the podcast, and to youtube.com/Enlightenment and Transformation TV. Make sure you comment, subscribe, and share. I read all the comments, just so you know, even the goofy ones. And, hit the like button, share them. Sharing the videos and things is most important. All right. But make sure you do all of those things. Engage and interact. Don't make me just feel like I'm talking to nothing all the time. The emails are good when they come in, but actually the comments are a little easier for me to manage than having to scroll through all the emails. Comments, I can look at real quick and respond or whatever. All right. So until such time, thank you so much, and continue to enjoy the rest of Chief Speaks. One love.
Sadulu House Spiritual Center would like to invite you to join our learning community by encouraging you to sign up for our monthly webinars. Our webinars offer live interactive instruction designed to help empower you in your spiritual evolution and ritual work. The webinars we provide are purposed to help you dive deeper into the concepts and calculations of the Chief Jegna of Anu Nation, Haru Yuya Asan Anu, through the decoding and exploration of sound, symbol, ancient and contemporary text, and various other tools used to invoke a state of highest awareness, we are able to abandon the constrictions of dead thought to travel to higher states of awareness, which is our rightful designation. To view our list of webinars, go to saduluhouse.com/events. Topics for 2016 include meditation, spiritual cleansing, astral projection, chakras, crystals, water magic, candle magic, the third eye, animal totems, dreams, and sex magic. Remember, go to saduluhouse.com/events to register.